Good evening. Thank you everyone for joining us. Today we have a very interesting topic, and it is the myth of charity. So charity is not exactly what you think it is. Today we're going to find out some interesting information and a very interesting perspective, the Jewish perspective on charity. So to the story of the Torah portion, we have the first fundraising campaign, at least in recorded history. So this was organized by Moshe. It was in order to build the Mishkan. It was in order to build the Holy Temple, but not the one in Jerusalem. The Jewish people were not there yet. They were still in the desert. So this was supposed to be a portable Mishkan, a portable Holy Temple sanctuary, and this was going to travel with the Jewish people throughout their journey in the desert. So this was a tremendous building project. It was a home for God. So this is the place where the Jewish people brought offerings. This was the place where God would speak to Moshe, to Aaron, the high priest. So this was a very important place. And for the Jewish people, this was really a symbol that God's presence was resting amongst them. So in order to build this sanctuary, this beautiful home, it required a very large amount of gold, silver, precious gems, all kinds of things. And where did all these treasures come from? They came from Egypt, basically compensation for the Jewish people's decades of slavery. So this is how the Jewish people had all of this money, all of this gold and silver. In fact, God promised Abraham, that his descendants would go into slavery, into Egypt. They'd go into exile, but in the end, they would come out, and they'd come out with tremendous riches and tremendous wealth. So this is where they had it from. I'd like to share my screen for a moment and put up one verse on the screen. It's the beginning verse of the story of this week's Torah portion, and it's very interesting to see the text. So let's do that. Okay, so hopefully you could see the screen, and it says like this. This is how this week's Torah portion opens up. God spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel and have them take for me a contribution." I think that's a typo, a contribution. So what is wrong with this verse? What is the problem with it? It's quite clear that it says, "Take for me a contribution." Okay, so normally if somebody is asking for money, if somebody's asking for a donation, for a contribution, they're going to say, "Please give, please open up your hearts and give to this important cause. We're building a house, a home for God." But here, it doesn't say give, it says take. So it does say take for me, but so that I'm referring to God. So it does say take for me, that it should be brought for this purpose. It should be brought for God, for God's home. But it's a very unusual word, and it would make much more sense if it would say, give for this project, give for my home, give for me, for my presence here amongst the Jewish people. So what this teaches us is something very fascinating. Normally, when it comes to charity, when it comes to giving, most people think that the person who's making the contribution, the person who's giving the donation, is the giver, and the other person is the receiver. But actually, this pasuk, this verse, teaches us that when somebody is a giver, when somebody is making a contribution, they're not just a giver, they're actually also a receiver. And the Medrash says something very interesting. The Medrash says that if somebody gives money to a poor person, Medrash says more than the giver gave the poor person gave to the giver. Meaning to say, when you give, you're actually benefiting and receiving more than you gave. Okay, so we have to unpack this. We have to understand what this means. But this is the idea. The Jewish idea of giving means that you're not just a giver, you're also taking. And that's why the verse chooses the word take for me, because the person giving is actually also taking. And let's understand what that means. We're not just talking about this person receiving some reward up in heaven that we don't know and that we don't see, we don't understand. We're actually talking about in the here and now. A giver is also receiving. So certainly we see this in relationships if we think about it, whether it's family, business, or social, whatever it might be. Someone who is generous, often the other party will respond in a same way or a similar way. So, that's on one level. Obviously, it goes way beyond that. It's not only exchanging favor for favor, but the very fact that, on a bit of a deeper level, the very fact that somebody is giving, they're doing something good, they're doing something noble, they're doing something right. This gives the person, it gives the contributor a tremendous sense of satisfaction. So again, this is why the verse uses this unusual word, the word take, because when you're giving, it's not just something coming from you being given to someone else. You're receiving something in exchange. You're receiving a tremendous sense of satisfaction from this noble deed that you did, and this special thing, special action that you took, special contribution that you made. And so sometimes you could see someone who gives to others, someone who's generous with others, and sometimes you could see them get frustrated that they're not being shown appreciation, they're not being thanked, they're not being acknowledged for their hard work and for what they're giving. But the fact is that that's not the main thing, because it's not just you giving to someone else. When somebody gives, they're receiving also. So God takes note of this action, this deed, this mitzvah that you took, and God responds with tremendous blessings. Sometimes it's in His own way. Not necessarily do we always see it right away, but we know that when we give, when we help, God gives us back much more than what we gave. So that's why our sages tell us that a person should never regret, a good action that they took. If they helped someone, if they did a favor, they made a contribution, you should never regret it, because that action had a tremendous impact, whether or not the receiver showed appreciation. And regardless, this was something noble, this was something right, this was a mitzvah, and certainly God took note of it, and God repays. So this is not just with money. Visiting someone in the hospital, helping someone with whatever it might be, with studies, with carrying their bags, with just a random favor, or something a little bit more difficult, counseling someone or comforting someone. These things could take time. These things could take energy, and some of these things could be emotionally draining. And it's true. It's true that these things could take a lot of your time, it could take a lot of your energy. But we all know that whatever whatever it is that we did for this person in these areas, it brings a tremendous amount of satisfaction, real deep satisfaction, that you were able to make a difference in someone's life. Depending on what you did for them, it could give you a real sense of purpose. The fact that you were able to help somebody through a crisis, the fact that you were able to be there for someone or give them hope, in a time of, in a challenging time or in a time of loss. So sure, the person who is giving the comfort, the person who's visiting, the person who's counseling, yeah, they're a giver. Certainly they're a giver. They're giving something very, very important, and they're probably making a big impact on this person's life. But they're receiving so much in return. So in a way, their life, the life of the giver, becomes so much more meaningful because of it becomes much more much more purposeful because of this worthy action, because of this special a time that they spent with a person and giving them what they need at that moment, at that time. So this is Judaism's way of understanding what it means to give. We don't call it give because the giver is also receiving, and probably they're receiving much more than what they gave, and in various forms, whether it's money, whether it's blessings and happiness in other areas, whatever it might be, whether it's a sense of purpose, a sense of meaning, they feel like they're making a contribution, making a difference in the world and society, making a difference in people's lives. And this is the idea. The idea is someone who gives is not just a giver, they're a receiver, and they're receiving more than what they gave. I'd like to point out another interesting thing is that when the Jewish people were told, they were given the mitzvah, given the commandment to build the Mishkan, to build the sanctuary, the portable holy temple, they could have allowed, the mega wealthy people to pay for the whole thing. I'm sure there were some Jews who were able to sponsor the whole thing, the wealthiest ones. But nevertheless, the mitzvah was very specific. The commandment was that everyone should participate. Men, women, and children, everyone should have a part. And the idea is that, like this, everyone has the opportunity to be a giver. It's such a special thing to be a giver that everyone should have this opportunity. It's not just for a few people to make it happen. It's not only about the building going up. It's not only about the sanctuary becoming a reality. It's about people having the opportunity to give to God. And they're also receiving. They're receiving so much in return, even more than what they gave. Now, it does happen to be that the actual work was done by a few people, people who were very dedicated, people who were very talented, and it was headed. The whole operation was headed by two people. Bezalel was one of them. And there was another one with him. So when it came down to it, a couple of people or a small group of people participated more than the others. So that does tell us that if someone has more talent, if someone has more ability, if somebody has more capacity, then they should give more. If they could, then they should. But this doesn't take away from the opportunity, from everyone's opportunity to be a giver. So everyone had the chance. Everyone was able to participate and have a role in this. And then afterwards, after everyone participated, there were some who decided to dedicate more of their time and commit more of themselves or more of their money, whatever it might be. And that's good too. That's good too. People who have more ability and talent and capacity should use that. Should give some extra to God as a thank you. As a thank you to God for the talents, but also, again, they receive so much more in return. They receive more than they give. So we have these two ideas. On the one hand, everyone had the opportunity, but on the other hand, people who were able to do more actually did more, and that's why we see that it was mainly a small group of people who actually made it happen on a practical level. Another thing about the Jewish view and the Jewish perspective is that material possessions is not an end for itself. So the goal in Judaism, money is good, and we'll talk about that soon. It's not a bad thing to be wealthy, but that's not an end for itself. That's not the end goal. Um, there's a saying that says the more possessions that someone has, the more worry they have. So sometimes you have much more. Now all of a sudden you need to make sure that it's all going to be safe. It's all going to be secure. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of your headspace. It takes a lot of your energy. So sometimes if somebody focuses on the money being an end for itself, then in a way they could be totally consumed by it, and that's all they have. And in a way, they could kind of be stuck in this vicious cycle of always trying to get more. And then there's more, there could be more worry, there could be less time for other things that are perhaps more important, and so on. So what's the Jewish perspective? The Jewish perspective is that when God gives you something, if God makes you wealthy, God gives you something nice. If you have an apartment, if you have a house, if you fill it with mitzvahs, you fill it with Jewish celebration and study of Torah and all of these things, the house actually becomes a part of the mitzvah, because you're using the house for these things. So of course the house is serving many functions, and this is where you're comfortable, and this is where your family is, and this is a lot of where your happiness comes from. But at the same time, because you're using the space for good things, for mitzvahs, for helping people, for studying Torah, whatever it might be, the actual house becomes part of the mitzvah, it becomes holy, it becomes sacred. Not only that, not only the object that we're using becomes holy, but actually all of it was paid for with something. It was paid for with money. So it turns out that even your time when you're working in your business, when you're doing your job and you're making money, that is also part of the mitzvah, because you're using all that energy that you put into your business and into your career. You're using all of that for a mitzvah. So all of that energy and all of that effort, all of that has a part in the mitzvah. And then going to work and making money is part of the mitzvah. And this is a very powerful thing. So it's good to make money, and it's not a sin to be wealthy. But the goal is not the money. The goal is to use what you have for a good purpose, for a mitzvah, and then that elevates all the parts of your life. When you take something that you invested so much physical energy into, when you take that and use it for a mitzvah, then all the effort that you put into that is all elevated, all becomes part of that mitzvah. We'll finish with one or two final points. And that is that giving a charity, tzedakah, in Judaism is two things. It's first of all a mitzvah. It's a commandment and it's an obligation. But at the same time, it's also a good deed, right? So on the one hand, there's a requirement, there's an obligation, but at the same time, when somebody goes ahead and actually keeps this mitzvah and does this mitzvah, they get credit for it, as because they did a good deed. So it's both an obligation and also a good deed. And like we were saying before, Judaism believes that wealth is a blessing from God. So basically, what's happening is God is entrusting you with what you have, And God is expecting you to share some of it, share some of your resources with others. So if you think about it, sometimes people ask the question, if God didn't want poor people, then why did he make them poor? God could have distributed money more equally, given everyone equal opportunity, given everyone the same chance in life. God could have done that. Why didn't he? The answer is that God didn't want a boring world. He wanted a dynamic world. He wanted a place where people, human beings, could participate with God as the creator, and a person could also be a provider. So it's not only that we receive, that we're on the receiving end and we're taking from God, but we also have the opportunity to be a provider. So instead of a boring world where everything is set out and everything is perfect, God wanted to give the control, so to speak, into the hands of people who have the power to choose between using their resources for something good or skipping out on the opportunity. So why did God give some people more and some people less? It's not because God doesn't want them to have more. It's because God wants us all to be providers and to be givers, because now we understand the importance of giving and the beauty and what it gives back, what the person receives when they contribute and when they give. And this is also hinted, maybe more than a hint. This is illustrated very strongly in the Hebrew word that the Torah uses for charity. The Torah uses the word tzedakah, charity. So actually, the truth of the matter is, if you know Hebrew, you'll know that the root word of tzedakah is tzedek. Tzedek means justice. So how did it go from justice to charity? I don't know. But actually, in Judaism, the Jewish perspective is that you're doing justice. God gave one person more because he wants them to be a giver. So actually, when you do give someone else, and you're helping someone else, and God entrusted you with the resources that he gave you. So when you live up to this expectation, so it's actually justice, because you're giving the person what they deserve. You were the agent, you were the messenger, but it was supposed to go to this needy person. This also explains why a very unusual law in Judaism, and that is that everyone has to give tzedakah. Everyone has a mitzvah, a commandment, and an obligation to give, even the person who's on the receiving end. So imagine one person is receiving tzedakah because he's poor and he's needy. He has to take a portion of that money and give it away to someone who has less. And the idea is that we are all supposed to be givers as well, and we all have the opportunity to be givers. So even if it's something small, even if you have a small capacity, you don't have that much time to volunteer for something or for someone, or you don't have too much extra money to help someone else, but there's always someone who has less than you. And a small portion is in fact a mitzvah, even for someone who's on the receiving end. And that means, and the reason for this is that because we're all supposed to be givers, we're all supposed to be, we're all supposed to have the opportunity to be a giver. And as we explained in the beginning, being a giver is so much more than being a giver. Someone who gives is actually receiving so much more in return. They're receiving it from their relationships, by receiving it from God through blessings and opportunities. Sometimes we see it right away, sometimes we don't. But the fact is that God always repays, and we always receive more than what we give.